to Dog Central Live late on a Thursday night. Well, I guess late on the East Coast, which is where most of you guys will be watching this. I am Graham Coffey, and I am actually rolling solo tonight. John Tweet Sports is on the road. I've been on the road this week, so schedules have not matched up super well, but did not want to skip a week of recording, so jumping in here real quick to answer some subscriber questions and chat a little Georgia football. Probably won't be our longest episode ever, but still should allow us to get into things and get you guys updated on the latest and greatest. Obviously, we are here heading towards the middle of June. UGA just kind of came off of what is widely considered to be their biggest recruiting weekend of the year. Lots of top prospects on campus, and I think maybe the biggest and best takeaway for Georgia as a program and for Georgia fans off of last weekend is that lots of big guys, I think, was kind of where UGA did their work this past weekend. This class so far has been heavy on skill players, good players across the board. It's number one ranked class. There's none of them that you'd want to throw back, so to speak. But how has Georgia won 2 straight national titles? They've done it by being pretty dominant on the line of scrimmage, right? So I think if you're kind of looking for UGA to continue implementing the formula that they have implemented to get to this point, to becoming the top program in college football currently, which is what they are. This recruiting weekend, I think, was very positive. Lots of, you get a commitment coming off the weekend from an in-state defensive tackle who I think has a lot of potential, very high ceiling kid. And then you also see Georgia now trending for some of the best OL and DL prospects in the country, which we're going to talk a little bit more about when we answer some of the subscriber questions that we have loaded up in here. If you're here and you're hanging out and you jump in the chat, I am happy to answer your questions. Obviously, cannot see your chat comments from Twitter. So if you want to throw something up here that I will see, be sure to go to DawgsCentral YouTube channel. Just Google DawgsCentral YouTube and you will be able to click on this video. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to hop into some of the questions that we've got loaded up here. And keep in mind, again, if you are a DawgsCentral.com subscriber, you can make sure you always get your questions answered on the show. So our friend RWB wants to know, outside of running back, which position group am I most concerned about from a depth perspective for 2022? It's an interesting question. So the running back room, I don't know, just to kind of address that assumption, I don't know that I am particularly worried about Georgia's running back depth, just in the sense Savon Clark came back out of the portal. Andrew Paul was looking very healthy when I was on the field before G-Day for warmups. He was moving well. He was wearing shoulder pads. I think by all accounts, he's he was very close during spring practice to, being back able to take contact. So I expect them to have Paul this fall. Did not mean to rhyme that. And you obviously have Kendall Milton and Dajan Edwards back. Dajan is just kind of a proven commodity, a guy who is really good at being patient, reading holes, getting between the tackles. Milton, I think, probably has still the highest upside of anybody in that room, particularly when he is healthy. So pulling for him to have a full season where he is, 100% for a 12 to 15 game schedule. Because I think if he does, he's going to put up some big numbers. And I think he will do a little more receiving than a lot of people expect. I think he's kind of underrated in that aspect. And then you obviously have Branson Robinson. Still some questions about exactly how healthy he will be at the start of the season, but I expect Georgia to have him when they get into the meat of their SEC schedule and to have him at 100%. So I'm not really worried about the numbers there. You look across the board, and it's not really just about what Georgia lost, right? Like it's more about, where are you kind of losing snaps and where have you recruited, right? And I think for me, the two positions that I am most worried about for Georgia are both on the offensive side of the ball. On the offensive line, if Georgia's first five, I think, are the best first five in the country. I expect Ernest Green to slide in most likely at left tackle. Blasky could do that as well. Like those two had a very good battle in spring, and I expect that to carry into fall camp. I just think that, Green really wasn't able to do a ton last year because he had an injured back and still was kind of working his way back to 100% during spring practice. And I think, even despite that, maybe was just a notch above Blasky. He was obviously the starter on G-Day, so read into that what you will, but I just think he's a really elite player. I profiled him in the 23 for 23 series. That kid has got really, really mature hands in terms of just kind of how he deals with pass rush moves. I think his game translates really well to the SEC level and to, college football playoff type competition. I just don't know what happens after that. And it's not to say that it's a problem necessarily or that there is not talented guys behind those first five. It's just, Amarius Mims is probably the best offensive lineman in the country. I think he ends up probably the top drafted offensive lineman in the 2024 draft class. I don't think that's a stretch. If he's not the top, he's certainly going to be a first round top 20 kind of pick like Broderick Jones was this past year. And then, you got Cedric Van Pran anchoring things in the middle, probably the best center in the country, right? And so Ratledge next to him, that right side of the line with Mims, Ratledge, Van Pran is going to be really, really nasty, very tough to deal with in zone and gap scheme run game. So I like what Georgia has going on. Left guard, you've got Truss, who's played a lot of football. Kind of like maybe the weakest link in that front five if Green hits like we expect him to, but a very good player who just, started a whole lot of games for Georgia in 2022. I expect him to, continue to be very solid for UGA. I just think that you got a lot of guys behind those five that haven't played very much football. And so someone will emerge, like Jared Wilson is a guy that I've heard lots of good things about, over this offseason. There's a lot of guys in that offensive line room who I think Georgia feels good about the future of. It's just different when you put guys out there, right? Like it's different when they finally get into the game. And yeah, Monroe Freeling has put on a lot of weight since he's got to campus. He's up well over 300 pounds now, but he's a true freshman, and you don't want to be throwing a true freshman tackle out there in the SEC. Blasky, I think, is a good player, and I think he could be kind of that sixth man for Georgia, like Ben Cleveland was at one time, or kind of Devin Willock last year, sort of came in at times, started some games at guard. Georgia rotated 7-0 last year and played them regularly. And I just am not totally sure yet who exactly that will be. Whether that's a Micah Morris, Jared Wilson at the guard position, and then after Blasky and Green at tackle. I don't know who's next, right? Probably Freeling, but like we just talked about, you don't want to throw a freshman out there in SEC play at tackle, even if they were a 5-star recruit, if you can help it. Yes, we have seen, Jamari Sawyer, Andrew Thomas, guys like that who were 5-stars come in and basically play right off the bat and be successful, but that is the exception. It's not the norm. So that would be the spot that I probably worry about the most for Georgia, especially because, as we sort of open the show with, the formula for Georgia has been dominance up front, right? Like that's what allows everything else to happen. That's what allows Brock Bowers to have 2 straight seasons of almost 1,000 yards and, all these other things. The second position I would probably be most concerned about from a depth standpoint for Georgia would be tight end. I like, obviously, Bowers is a stud, and Lawson Lucky looked really good on G-Day. Oscar Delp, talented recruit who I think is a very good player, but more of a flex tight end, right? Like I think Lucky might already be a little bit better of an inline blocker than Delp is. So when you have that situation, you didn't sign Deuce Robinson, which everyone kind of thought they were going to for a while. And I just go back to the last couple seasons, and Georgia has run as much 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets as anyone in the country, save for Utah, right? And often, threw 3 tight ends out there at times, especially in 2021 when they had John Fitzpatrick. So I think that position group with Rylan Goad and Brett Seether gone is a little bit thin. So interested to see kind of what happens there for Georgia, because I think, going back to 2022, what made Georgia more explosive than we really had seen since 2018 was just the conflict and the matchup issues that those tight ends created, being too big basically to deal with in the run game if you had extra defensive backs on the field, but also having Washington and Bowers be too fast to cover with a linebacker was really, I think, what kind of catalyzed everything else around it. So definitely think Georgia needs to stay healthy there. All right. So that is first question. Let's move on. And I saw the question. I'll go ahead and take this now so I don't forget. Blue Brody 7 asks, immediate thoughts on Wes Johnson. I don't have like a super strong take one way or the other. I'm interested to see. It's a long contract, right? $700,000 a year, and I believe 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a pretty significant period of time, right? I think that's a pretty solid number. Like as far as, I would say that Georgia, $700,000. If my math's right here, $4.2 million over 6 years. That's a significant investment into a baseball coach. That's a long contract for a guy who has been kind of nomadic throughout his career, but he's also never had a head job. Well, that's not true, but he hasn't had a head job in a while. So clearly a guy who wants to be in college baseball, left the Minnesota Twins organization to be a pitching coach at LSU. So I think he's passionate, has a ton of experience in the SEC. I played for Arkansas, has been on SEC staffs. The weakness of Georgia's team the last couple of years is definitely, if you had to pick pitching versus hitting, has definitely been pitching. So having a guy who has been a pitching coach, I think, helps them in that regard. And I also think that he can kind of go out on the recruiting trail and sell having experience at the MLB level and knowing what it takes to get there if you're a college baseball player. But at the end of the day, this is all going to come down to recruiting. Georgia has made some plans for long-term investment into the baseball program, and I think they're going to move forward with those. At one, it sounded like those were on hold. I'm not honestly 100% sure like when the true start date for some of that is, but Georgia's facilities are behind in baseball, and I think they know that. I think Josh Brooks knows that. I think there's a plan to rectify that. I also think that Georgia is, if you're talking about baseball talent, the state of Georgia in baseball is much like it is in football, if not even a little bit better, which is saying quite a bit. There's a ton of baseball talent in that state, and UGA needs to keep more of it home. There's a lot of those guys that are going to Florida and South Carolina and LSU and Tennessee and Vanderbilt and so on and so forth, and UNC, ACC schools as well. I think if Georgia can do that under Wes Johnson, then he will have an extremely successful tenure there, and that will be the big question. And so my kind of opinion on this hire could be very much influenced by who he hires as lead assistants. I could see him, if he's willing to go into someone, into the high school ranks. I'd heard some buzz at one point about, and this is, more rumor than sourced information, just to be clear. But during the search, I had talked about, I'd heard it talked about that perhaps Georgia would maybe encourage the hire to go and get one of the best high school baseball coaches in the state. Like, go and get the guy from North Cobb. Go and get somebody that is really deeply tied to baseball, travel baseball, high school baseball in the Atlanta area, and really build the pipeline that they haven't been able to build. If that happens, I think that greatly increases Johnson's chances of having success. So be interesting to see. I think, though, that Josh Brooks, you look at the hires that he's made across sports, right? Like Georgia's non-revenue sports are pretty much very, like, aside from baseball, really, this past season, they were extremely competitive across the board. And the hire of Mike White looks better and better really every day. He's just put together the second-ranked recruiting class in the SEC. There's some real momentum there. And I think, Georgia is playing the NIL game in basketball. And I think, that's the other question is, like, will there be NIL opportunities for guys who are successful baseball players at Georgia? Because I know there are at other SEC schools, and at a lot of SEC schools, baseball gets treated like the number 2 sport. So those are all things that are kind of outside Wes Johnson's control, but just I believe that Josh Brooks has kind of earned the benefit of the doubt in terms of having a comprehensive plan for not just the football program, but all the sports programs in the UGA athletic department. So I hope that answers your question. All right. Raleigh Dog asks about candidates for kick returner and punt returner this year. He is rightfully worried about the chances of Arian Smith or Ladd McConkey being hurt back there. Arian Smith, we have not seen return punts at Georgia. Kirby Smart has said himself, like they kind of, even with practice, they manage him and treat him and watch him just differently than they do other players because of his injury history. So I'd be fairly shocked to see him back there taking punt returns. I don't think that is going to happen. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. But McConkey's knee tendonitis, definitely a legitimate question. I forget who it was. I apologize, but one of the kind of more popular NFL draft scouts was talking this week on Twitter about McConkey's just a guy that should play in the NFL, could play in the NFL for a long time, and if he cleans up some of his drops, will probably end up being as high as a top 100 pick, a kind of top third round pick next year. So that's worth watching for sure. I would think for next season, probably the guy that has the inside track on that right now would be Mekhi Muse. You saw him have 2 big kick returns on G-Day. I think that Georgia, really going back to last fall camp, we were hearing about him and talking about him in some of our practice reports. Like, they want to find a way to get the ball into his hands. And I think Kirby Smart, trusts him to go back there and catch the football and take a fair catch if he needs to. So he would be my number one candidate for punt returns. But I mean, last year, Ladd took 16 of the 21 punt returns that UGA had. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's back there again, especially considering the fact that Georgia does have more help for him at wide receiver this year. You've got Lovett and Thomas coming in. You've got a lot of really talented young kids. And that's the other spot I was going to talk about is, like, I wouldn't be shocked to see one of these kind of, younger freshman type players maybe just demand some touches at punt returner or kick returner. And, Anthony Evans comes to mind in particular. Yazid Haynes. Anthony Evans was playing in spring practice with a messed up ankle and still blowing past people at the line of scrimmage. So at full speed, that guy can move like different levels. Tyler Williams, really successful kick returner in high school. I think he's more of a kick returner style, like less punt returners. I think you want them to be more agile. Kick returners, obviously you want them to have good vision and some decent cut ability, but those guys are more getting straight up field. And honestly, kick returns have been damn near eliminated from college football at this point anyway. So last year, I think Georgia had 24 total kick returns. And Dejan was someone who had some success there. But yeah, Kyrus Jackson was sort of the main kick returner for the last couple, maybe 3 years, honestly, going back to 2020. So it's a good question. We will see who gets replaced there for sure. Miles asks, which position group is UGA furthest behind on recruiting for the 2024 cycle? That is a tough question because Georgia is in on so many players right now, honestly. I think if you kind of break this down from a position standpoint, you've got Ellis Robinson and DeMello Jones committed at DB, and then you have Hayward and Woodyard at safety, and I think you're going to have KJ Bolden committed there soon. So secondary, excellent shape. Tight end, Riddell and Heinrich committed. I think you get the kid out of Nebraska that was on campus last weekend, the freak athlete that's like 6'4", 220, and I think he rushed, passed for, and received for a over 700 yards in each category last year, or close to 700 yards in each category last year, if I'm not mistaken. So he's a fun one if you haven't watched his film. Obviously, quarterback is in great shape. They've got 2 offensive tackles committed in Harrison and Tolliver, but, the Harrison kid's huge, but I just don't know, what his athletic ceiling is. I guess his ceiling is really high. I just don't know how polished he is coming in. I would go with the DL. Yeah, I think you got to go DL. You don't have a true edge player committed yet. It would have to be the linebacker or defensive line. And I think that front 7 recruiting for Georgia still shaking out. And I'm gonna answer some questions about both those positions here in a second that other folks asked conveniently enough. So I want to thank you guys for creating a natural segue. Makes us look good here on the DawgsCentral YouTube channel. Getting Justin Green this week was a good start on the defensive line, but looking at just our the reports that I did on DawgsCentral and that Jason did on DawgsCentral this week, lot of big guys that are in play right now, and I think Georgia is close to kind of slamming the door shut and finishing some of those recruitments, getting some of those guys publicly committed, but not quite there yet. I expect Joseph Jonah Ajane, I hope I said his name right. Apologize to Joseph, I didn't. Still learning some of the recruits' names, but I think he is, close to being a public commit for UGA. I think at this point it would be a pretty big surprise to everyone if he is not. So that's another. I think he's a guy who is a true defensive end, right? Kind of 260, 270 athletic, play that 4-eye defensive end position that Michael Williams has played, Travon Walker has played. Georgia likes to have 2 of those guys on the field in certain situations. So, expect him to commit soon. That will shore up some things. But you have Riddick committed right now, and I think at one point everyone felt like he's maybe drifting towards Auburn or Alabama, going to one of his home state schools. Now it feels like that recruitment is kind of swung back towards Georgia, so positive for UGA there. But I think, now you've got the rest of the inside linebacker class to figure out. The Sammy Brown thing is done. I think they keep Riddick right now. And then, the question is, like, all of a sudden, about 2 weeks ago, we at DawgsCentral started hearing about Georgia in on all these linebackers. And linebackers want to play for Georgia. They want to go play for Glenn Schumann. They look at all of the guys that have been drafted at that position highly and are having success in the NFL. Like, that is a spot where Georgia, can really clean up. And so Justin Williams is the big prize there. I think he's kind of the unicorn of the class. He is rated higher than Sammy Brown for a reason. He's a very, very good athlete, but he is a little more polished than Brown. Like, his tape is a blast to watch. He's a Texas kid. He's also a high school teammate of Joseph Jonah Ajane, who we were just talking about a second ago, that I think will commit to Georgia soon. I think that is a recruitment that, Georgia is, I wouldn't call it wrapped up or anything like that. I mean, he's the number 1 linebacker in the country. Lots of people are going to come at him hard, but really, really like Georgia's place in that. And I like it even better if and when his teammate commits there on the defensive line. And then you've got you've got a lot of other guys. You've got Chris Jones, who's a 4-star linebacker out of Virginia, the number 1 player in the state of Virginia. All of a sudden, it sounds like he's very, very interested in Georgia. You've got Jamonte Walker. He's the number 7 linebacker in the class out of Picayune, Mississippi. Last time Georgia landed a linebacker out of Mississippi, it worked pretty well for them, right? And Nakobe Dean. So interested to see how that kind of shakes out. And I think that is – I think Georgia's inside linebacker class is going to be fine, but I think, like, there's this kind of – it's become this, like, sore spot this week because Clemson landed Sammy Brown, and obviously that was disappointing to a lot of folks. So what does Georgia do normally when a big name prospect gets away and it's a public conversation? Like Landon Thomas was the number 2 tight end in the class, was committed to Georgia. He flips to Florida State. What does Georgia do? They go out and sign the number 1 tight end in the class in Jaden Riddell. So I think you'll have some good news in the near future on the inside linebacker front, and then it's the DL, right? And I think that's the big question. That's the one that everyone is, kind of, I think, looking at and talking about. I really, really like where Georgia is with Justin Scott after this past weekend. Those of you who are not familiar, Scott is a kid out of Illinois, out of the Chicago area. You should Google the picture of him from his visit in a Georgia jersey, because like he just the width of the guy's shoulders, and like he's just a huge dude. And yeah, I think that Georgia is very much in on him, maybe even trending as the leader for Scott right now. He would kind of fit that mold of, how should I say, that true kind of zero tech sort of unicorn type player that no one else in the country has except for a few elite programs. And that's why I think it's important to talk about this and look at this is, he's a 6'5", 310-pound kid who is a very good basketball player. Like, that's the type of athlete he is. And right now he's a 5-star top 10 in the country overall player, depending on which recruiting service you're a fan of. Some think he's the number 1 defensive lineman in the country. I tend to agree with that, although there's some other very, very good defensive linemen out there. So watch him with UGA. I think Georgia is still in things with Williams Nwaneri, Missouri kid. Oklahoma is going to be hard to beat there, but he's more that type that can kind of move across the front, play anything from three tech to outside, stand up pass rusher type player, 6'6", 260, long prototypical pass rusher, but also can get in there in the middle and seal some gaps. And then Edric Houston is one that is still in play for Georgia as well. And I think a lot of people felt like he was going to Ohio State. It sounds like that recruitment probably still has some more twists and turns to happen in it. So watch that, as well as Aiden Breland, Mater Dei kid, Santa Ana, out in Los Angeles area, Southern California area. He was on campus this spring. Another 300-plus pounder. But point being, if you look at Georgia's commitment list right now, the front 7 of the defense looks thin. But, I mean, they are in on – I mean, right now Georgia is legitimately in on, 5 of the top 8 defensive line prospects in the country. And I'd say they're legitimately in on how many linebacker prospects here? 1, 2. There's a chance they go 1, 2. I mean, depending on, depending on which recruiting service you subscribe to or believe in. But yeah, Joseph Phillips is another kid out of Booker T. Washington in Tuskegee, Alabama. He's a guy that I think a lot of people had going to Auburn, and Georgia's really turned the heat up on him here recently. So I don't know. At this point, I feel like I would be silly to sit here in June and worry about Georgia's recruiting, especially on the defensive side of the ball. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question. All right, a couple of questions from the chat. Let's shake it up. Appreciate you guys getting involved in the chat. How do you think we sit with Frazier? Nate Frazier is who Rugsy Vids here is talking about. He says, I want this running back so bad. His tape is nuts. Yeah, Nate Frazier is a dude, and I think a lot of people don't maybe know about him as much. He's definitely underrated by the recruiting industry right now. I mean, he's still like a 4-star running back, but he plays on a Mater Day team that is stacked with, I think he's one of 3 future Power 5 running backs on that roster right now. And it's a high school that beats most of their opponents senseless. So doesn't get a ton of touches, but when he does get touches, super explosive, very good receiver, like high ceiling player. I think that Georgia is in a really good spot with Frazier. When he was on campus last was April 22nd, the weekend after G-Day. And at that time, there was some folks that I talked to and trust that were like, hey, watch out, Frazier could pop here soon. He could be a public commit to UGA in the near future. And just kind of checking back in on the running back front after Jarrett Gibson was on campus this past weekend, the vibe that I'm still getting from sources is like, I think Georgia expects Frazier to be part of this class right now. And they're getting him back on campus this weekend, and they're not even having to spend an OV on it, which is a really good sign, especially for a kid that lives, 3,000 miles away out in California. So I really like where they stand with Frazier. And then I play games. Wants to know if Ellis Robinson is playing games. Ellis Robinson, number 1 cornerback recruit in the country in this 2024 cycle right now. I think Ellis is solidly committed. I think he's been in love with UGA for years now. We had him on the 100 Sanford podcast last fall, and he talked about his relationship with Fran Brown, and he's a really smart kid. Very mature, very, I think, detail oriented, and is going to, make sure he explores every angle of a decision this big before he makes it. I'll give this one away for free in case you're watching this and you're not a DawgsCentral subscriber. We just posted on DawgsCentral, or I just posted on DawgsCentral like 30 minutes ago, that Robinson will take an OV to Alabama. Previously, only Miami was on there, was scheduled to have an OV with him. And I'm not even 100. He's supposed to be in Miami this weekend. I'm not 100% sure if he goes or not, but he personally told me he is going to take an OV to Alabama, and he's got a very good relationship with Tavares Robinson, their cornerbacks coach there. So, I mean, Georgia is back-to-back national champions, have kind of gotten that Alabama monkey off their back, so to speak. But, like, it's still Alabama, right? Like, it's still an attractive program. It's still Nick Saban and secondary. And, that's kind of his bread and butter in the coaching world. So it's a threat, but I mean, when I talked to Ellis after his visit this past weekend, he was just like, yeah, I kind of felt like I'd seen everything I was going to see from Georgia. And then, I come to town and they really hammered me with player development and the way that, they take care of players and prepare them for life after football. And my parents and I were really, really impressed with that kind of aspect of the program. And point being, I think there's not any like cooling off that seems to be happening between him and Georgia. And I think that he's very, very tight with Fran Brown. Like a lot of prospects, he loves Fran Brown. So I think that Ellis is solid. I think Georgia was hoping he would shut down his recruitment entirely after this past weekend. And it doesn't look like that's happening, but I would not be surprised if, he takes a visit to Bama, kind of circles back, sits down, thinks about everything. And at that point, if unless something changes dramatically, I could see him shutting his recruitment down before he starts his fall camp in preparation for his senior season at IMG. So on the list of guys that I would be stressed about flipping if I was a Georgia fan, he would be down the list a little bit. So hopefully that calms some nerves. Okay. Already answered the question about linebackers. Let's go back to on the field stuff. Player not getting a lot of buzz who could be a key piece to Georgia's team this year. Oh man, like that's a tough one, especially when Georgia recruits as well as Georgia recruits. Let me look at something real quick here. I think it's tough to define, buzz exactly, and how exactly we're gonna call buzz, but I think that on the freshmen, you've got these like high 4-star, 5-star freshmen that everybody's excited about with like Damon Wilson and Jordan Hall. Those guys I think have probably been talked about a lot just because they're the shiny new pieces of the team that people are excited about. I'm going to say Xavier Sori. I think he's always been like a little bit different level as an athlete. And they played him some at edge last year, and he didn't play a lot. Wasn't really a huge contributor, but he played as an on-ball linebacker all throughout high school, and then he comes to Georgia, and he's behind a bunch of really talented inside linebackers, but his body type and his skill set is more suited to that. And I think the lights kind of finally clicked for him. And if you go back and watch some of what he did on G-Day, like he played very, very well. And he is, athletically speaking, just on another level, even from what you're used to seeing at inside linebacker at UGA. So I think there's a good chance that we see him play a significant amount of snaps at inside linebacker this year, because we know Georgia likes to rotate. We know Georgia's going to win a lot of games by large margins. And we know that Sori is going to be in a room where like Mondon, might not start the season 100% healthy. You have Dumas Johnson in there, obviously, but even with all the talented young guys kind of coming up with like Raylan Wilson and CJ Allen, I still think Xavier Sori makes some significant plays for Georgia this year. And then breakout season candidate besides Carson Beck. Breakout season candidate. So I am going to go. I'm going to go with Lawson Lucky. I think, just people that I talk to, they really like him. And I'm not going to compare him to Brock Bowers because that's not fair to do to anybody. Brock Bowers is a one-of-one type dude, but I think he's got the ability to be extremely impactful for Georgia in 2023. And I think that his ability to block as an inline tight end is going to let him see the field a lot early. So I'll go with him. And then on the defensive side of the ball, a little bit of a wild card, but I'm going to say Julian Humphrey. I think Julian Humphrey is much more in that battle for the second cornerback position than a lot of people realize. And just like standing down on the field in front of him during warmups for G-Day, I was kind of watching him closely because some sources had been talking about him a lot and how they like his game. And Humphrey, just physically speaking, the way he moves, the way he is built, like he honestly looks very similar to Malachi Starks. And I think he's a guy that, he can play boundary corner, but I think he could be sort of the sixth defensive back as well. Stephen Fowler says Joe Nell. That's a very good one as well. I like that one. Joe Nell definitely is another one of those kids that just kind of moves differently. Georgia's got so much talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, that it's silly. And they're going to have to find a way to get a lot of those guys snaps because they are going to want to keep them because they're all very, very good, or most of them are very, very good. Rugsy asks if I think that Georgia has a 1,000-yard running back in 2023. I do not. No, I don't. I think that you're going to see like a kind of the four-headed, three-headed monster type thing. I think that somebody could come close, but I think you're going to see Georgia have like an 800-yard, like an 800-yard back and a 700-yard back and like a 450-yard back type thing. But I'm open to being wrong. Definitely been wrong before. Boise Dog asks about where Georgia's staff ranks the defensive line / edge players we're in on. I didn't want you to think I was ignoring your question, and we did just kind of talk a little bit about that position of recruits. Honestly, I don't know. I think that there's a lot that they like, a whole lot. I think Georgia's more in on Dylan Stewart than a lot of people think. And he's the number one edge in the class. I don't really know what their feelings are on a lot of these other edges. And I think that there's a chance they're looking at kind of some of the inside linebacker prospects who are very, very good athletes and a little bit longer as players who they could kind of potentially turn into like another Nolan Smith type, everybody wants these like 6'6" edges, but Georgia tends to like the guys that are, more in that 6'3", 6'3.5", 6'4" range. So we'll see. And then on the defensive line, I think that they like a lot of guys a lot. I think that honestly, they're going to put pressure on guys like Justin Scott and, Breland probably, and Nwaneri. Like they're going to kind of say, hey, like we're only taking so many defensive linemen. I think that Joseph Jonah Ajanye, they're going to get a commitment from him soon. So obviously they like him quite a bit. But I think there's probably 4 or 5 guys in there that they would be happy to take any of them, and they'll probably get 2 or 3 of them. So, yeah. All right. Last question from the subscribers. Raleigh Dog asked, who do I think the first staff member to leave is? And on our website, he made some, kind of just interesting commentary about the crew that Kirby has built. It made me think of Smart's comments against Oregon after the Oregon game last year, saying that, this is the best staff he's ever put together. And just in 2021, there was a lot, maybe we'll write about this at some point, maybe when everybody's gone. But there was a lot of times where certain members of the staff, I think, butted heads or had some philosophical differences, or, obviously heat of the battle, everybody's going to get emotional or, things are going to be said. But I think there was kind of some guys on that staff that were maybe not always quite so cohesive. And then in 2022, you never heard anything about that. I think Kirby kind of had this moment in his coaching career where he was like, I want to work with guys that are easy to work with and fun to work with, and are going to work well together. And that's what he's assembled. So I think the first guy to leave is going to be Schumann. And I think it's just going to be because at some point he's got to go, right? I think that he could be, I think there's a good chance he could be a P5 head coach in 2024. I've said for years now that I think that there's a very high probability that he ends up at Alabama when Saban leaves. The question is going to be, does he feel like he needs to go and get a couple of years experience under his belt to take that job? I think he'd be crazy to take that job. I think the guy that follows Saban is basically, asking himself for trouble. But, Schumann is an Alabama graduate. His dad played there. He loves the school. So I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up back there someday. But, he's making $2 million a year this season for a reason. And the Philadelphia Eagles wanted to hire him as their defensive coordinator, despite the fact that he has never worked or played in an NFL locker room. And I think that says quite a bit about his football acumen, his smarts. The Eagles couldn't get Glenn Schumann, so they, look at their draft strategy. They were like, well, the next best thing, if we can't get, the guy from Georgia, is to draft 5 or 6 of his players for our defense that he and Kirby Smart and Will Muschamp and the rest helped train. So I think that Schumann is going to have a very interesting decision to make, because there's obviously a market for him as an NFL coach, and with NIL and all of the other crap that is going on in college football right now, and just the difficulty of being a college football coach and the amount of time that it consumes, I think that there's a very good chance that Glenn Schumann is going to want to maybe say, hey, let me go this route. I'm going to make, just as much money, and I'm not going to have to deal with quite so much stuff, and I can have more of a life and more of a true off season. So that would be the obvious choice for me, would be Schumann. And then let's see. I do think one of you asked if I think Muschamp will take over when Schumann leaves for the NFL. I do, and I wouldn't be shocked, honestly. I wouldn't be shocked if Muschamp becomes a head coach again someday. It's going to take some time, and South Carolina was such a bad place for him to go. But yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if maybe 5 years from now he's a P5 head coach again, if he wants to be, and he might not. I think he's loving what he's doing and who he's doing it with in Athens in terms of working with Kirby. One of you also asked how long is Bobo on Kirby's staff. Let's see how this goes. Let's see how this year goes, honestly. And I think that will tell us a lot more. Those two dudes clearly, they love each other. They're good friends. They get along really well. So if everything goes well on the field, then think he could be there for a long time. One of you asked when we'll get more news on Georgia's basketball schedule. I don't know. There was a game in works at Phillips Arena that I had heard about that was going to be a pretty big high-profile game with a large national brand. And then some things fell through on the other team's side with the television contract, nothing related to Georgia. So they did just announce they were, playing Oregon. I don't know if we'll get more, I think Georgia and Mike White are trying to schedule aggressively and schedule some marquee matchups with, big name teams and the ACC and Big 12 and Pac 12. So we'll see. Yeah. All right. I wanted to finish tonight because if obviously I am fairly active on twitter.com. And it has been, what is today? Today is June 8th. Georgia and Ohio State played football against each other on December 31st of 2022. And I still see people talking about this. I still see Ohio State fans talking about this all the time. And there's still people in the media as well who really, I think, truly believe like one of two things. One, that Georgia got lucky. Two, that Georgia loses that game if Marvin Harrison doesn't go out there in the third quarter. Couple things. First, it had been about a quarter and a half since Harrison had a catch. There is this idea that Georgia all of a sudden started getting stops on defense because Marvin Harrison went out of that game. Georgia started getting stops on defense because after the first drive of the second half, they totally changed their defensive strategy. They started bringing 5 and 6 guys basically every down, especially on any and all obvious passing downs. And CJ Stroud went from having all the time in the world to freelance around in the backfield and roll out and run to the sideline and, create situations where Georgia's defenders were having to cover for 6, 7, 8 seconds to running for his life from Jalen Walker and Smile Mondon and a bunch of other guys. That is what changed that game. It was not, Marvin Harrison going out changed the game. We're not going to sit here and act like it didn't. That would be a crazy thing to say. But that is not why Georgia started stopping them on defense. And it had been, like a quarter and a half, I believe, since Harrison had a catch in that football game. He is a very talented receiver. He's very good, but that is not the reason why, Georgia held Ohio State to 6 points over the last, I think, 25 minutes of that game. So first of all, let's get that out of the way. Second of all, this idea that, this dirty play happened to take Harrison out of the game. First of all, it wasn't a dirty play. Like, I've seen a lot of dirty football plays. I'm not the oldest guy out there, but I'm in my mid-30s, okay? Like, I grew up in an era of college football where, where Junior Rosegreen knocked Reggie Brown out cold in the middle of Jordan-Hare Stadium in 2004, and Auburn's fan base in the stands went rabidly crazy in celebration of it. I watched Bakari Rambo knock himself out, breaking up a touchdown pass that would have won the game for Auburn in Athens in, I believe, 2010. That was from, I think, Brandon Cox to Mario Fannin. Point being, I have watched a lot of football over the years and a lot of really physical football. And there's been a lot of headhunters to play in the SEC. There's been headhunters to play for Georgia. Greg Blue will tell you to your face that he was a headhunter, that he wanted to, knock the shit out of people. Javon Bullard led with his shoulder. And if he had wanted to hurt Marvin Harrison Jr., he could have gone about it and would have gone about it in a much different way, because CJ Stroud threw up a pop fly that was destined to end in a big hit for his receiver. And it's Bullard's job to break the play up, and it's CJ Stroud's job to not throw that football, up into the air for that long of a period of time and get his wide receiver knocked like that, because that is part of playing quarterback, is protecting your receivers. And in all of the talk that I've heard over the last 5 or 6 months, especially in the lead up to the NFL draft, about how outstanding CJ Stroud was in that game and how he nearly, won Ohio State that football game, and how lucky Georgia was that Harrison got knocked out. No one with a national media platform has ever once acknowledged the fact that Marvin Harrison Jr. would have been in that game if not for CJ Stroud throwing off of his back foot on a 3rd and goal from 15 yards behind the line of scrimmage on a play that, A, should have just chucked it out of the end zone, but B, also could have just as easily resulted in an interception. Ohio State still got a field goal out of that play. So that part is craziness as well. It's the reason that Bullard was able to hit Harrison and had to hit Harrison was all based on Ohio State. It wasn't, no one on Georgia's sideline said, "Hey, Javon, guess what? CJ is about to loft a pop fly up to the back line of the end zone that Marvin Harrison's going to have to stand under for 3 or 4 seconds. Make sure you take him out when you do." It's not that predictable. So, secondly, the idea that Georgia got lucky to win that game, and I think that idea comes from the fact that they were behind by 14 in that game. And look, I was in the stadium. I don't think that that was a game where everyone felt like Georgia was playing well all night. But if you look back statistically at what happened in that football game, Georgia outgained Ohio State by over 1.8 yards per play. Georgia's offensive output was 8.9 yards per play. Ohio State's offensive output was 7.1 yards per play. Okay, Georgia had, let's see here, Stetson threw the ball 34 times, and Georgia had 13, 16, 17, 24. So Georgia ran 68 plays in that game, all right, at an 8.9 yard per play clip. They had a net yard per play advantage of 1.8 yards, okay? An elite college football team on the season is at the 2.0, the plus 2.0 net yards per play threshold. Georgia treated Ohio State on a down-to-down basis essentially the same as they treated, Kentucky. Let's see. What was their net yard per play against Kentucky? Actually, no, it was much more even against Kentucky. Let's see. Mississippi State. Georgia outgained Mississippi State by 2.1 yards per play. So Georgia treated Ohio State like a slightly better Mississippi State on a down-to-down basis. They also did that without Darnell Washington, who, if you were here in the beginning of this show, we sat around and talked about concerns about, Georgia's tight end depth for 2023, because the entire key to Georgia's offense, especially in 2022, but a very large key to it in 2021 as well, has been how Georgia uses its tight ends, and the fact that they put 2 of them on the field a whole lot more than any other program in college football except for Utah, and they use them to create matchup problems. They use them to be too big for you to handle in the run game if you have 5 and 6 defensive backs on the field, and they use them to be too fast to deal with in the passing game if you put more linebackers and heavier defensive linemen on the field. And they create that conflict, and whatever personnel you put on the field to deal with, if you want to stop the run, then they use those tight ends to run past your linebackers and go over the seam. And the threat of doing that is what really allowed Georgia to everything else they did on offense last year. It is why Arian Smith had one-on-one coverage to, run past against Tennessee. It is why Ladd McConkey had a double move in, a ton of space that he could deploy against Tennessee for a touchdown. It is why almost everything happened for Georgia's offense like it did, was the problem that created. And Darnell Washington went out of that game in the first quarter. By the way, go back and look at what Georgia's rushing attack was doing to Ohio State prior to him going out and what they did afterwards. But either way, Darnell Washington goes out in the first quarter of that game, who I think almost anyone who's super well informed about what Georgia did on offense last year would tell you was the most important player to what Georgia wanted to do schematically, aside from probably Stetson Bennett, because he's a quarterback. And they still outgained Ohio State by 1.8 yards per play. And we're still sitting here in June listening to Ohio State fans talk about how Georgia was lucky. And not just Ohio State fans, but like actual media members who cover actual college football, who should be smarter than this, are sitting here in June still talking about how Georgia got lucky to beat Ohio State and how they wouldn't have done it if Marvin Harrison isn't hurt in that game. And my question for you is, what would Georgia have done to Ohio State's defense if Darnell Washington had been had been healthy that entire game? They put up 8.9 yards of play on him. Do you think it's what is it, 10.0, 10.5, 10.2? Are you lucky if you win a football game with a 3.0 net yard per play advantage against an opponent? No, never. You're not lucky if you win a football game with a 1.8 net yard per play advantage, which is what they had that night. Also, if you're going to go down the injury train, like, what does Georgia look like that night with a healthy Nolan Smith? The guy that was just a first-round draft pick that ran a freaking 4.3940 in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. Do you think that Stroud is freelancing quite as much and is able to just stroll outside the pocket for a couple touchdown throws, rolling right off of Nolan Smith's edge if he's healthy in that game? I doubt it, personally. But he wasn't there, so Georgia had to deal with it. And they did deal with it. They won. But this idea is mania, and it's absurd, and it's just honestly people who continue to latch onto it, you're really only telling on yourself. And at the end of the day, if you go down the advanced stat box score for the Georgia-Ohio State college football playoff semifinal, Georgia had a post-game win expectancy of 67%. And they were creating many more scoring opportunities. They did not cash those scoring opportunities in. It is credit to Ohio State for getting themselves a turnover, in Georgia's end that allowed them to basically steal a possession and score a touchdown off of it. But that game was only close because you get two Georgia drives ending in missed field goals in scoring range. You get a touchdown off an interception, and you get two other drives where Georgia has to take field goals. That's basically, you're talking 4 drives in scoring range that Georgia gets 6 points out of. And they still put up 42 points in the game. They dominated Ohio State on a down-to-down basis, and it's quite obvious to anyone who actually wants to go and do their research and understand how football is actually played. All right. On that note, we are going to close. Thank you as always for being here, and really, really want to say thank you to any and all of you who are watching right now that subscribe to DawgsCentral. If you're not subscribed to DawgsCentral, I really do believe you're missing out. If you are tired of going to try and find updates on Georgia football or Georgia recruiting or read practice notes and having to sift through political opinions or people making, uneducated insults to each other without any sort of intelligent debate, or you're tired of just sifting through a bunch of bullshit to try and get your football fix, then I think DawgsCentral is the place for you. I know it is. We've very intentionally curated this community to be filled with people who are civil and want to have good football conversations and are capable of disagreeing with each other respectfully, which is quite a novel idea in the year 2023. But I really do think we've got a super cool, super special thing going on. And I hope all of you will take a chance and join us over there. And right now, if you want to try out the website, you can try it 60 days for $1. Can't even pay a toll for $1 these days. It's a good deal. So, or maybe it's $2. I forget. Either way, it's super cheap. Go and check it out. We'll see you on DawgsCentral.com.